Well, thanks for everybody for coming. Thanks for the invitation for the seminar. It's a great honor to be here. I'm going to start to talk about the theme, which is the influence of geopolitics in the new energy era. And I'd like to ask you, Joshua, how does the energy transition has become related with the geopolitical events that has been taking place in the last 5 years? We know that it started with the Russian-Ukraine war. When they started, Europeans made a movement to increase the renewables as a new source to replace gas supply from Russia. But from that point to now, a lot of things has happened. And if you care to make an overview of the geopolitics from for the energy in this period, I'd like to start in that.
Oh, here we go. Bon dia. It's really a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the question. It's one that we spend a lot of time thinking about at the Department of Energy because, as my boss is often frequent to remind me, we don't work at the Department of Energy. We work at the Department of Everything because there's nothing that energy doesn't touch. And the way that geopolitics interacts with energy has only been increasingly focused, as you've said, in recent years due to conflicts, but not conflicts over energy, but where energy has been weaponized and used in that conflict. And I think that distinction is really important. There was a time in history when we thought, and not in the not so distant past, where we saw energy and the competition for energy resources as the flashpoint for conflict. And that's what all of the wars were hinging upon, is access to those energy resources and who controlled them and who didn't have enough and what that was going to do in terms of motivations. And increasingly that's shifted. And it's been a subtle but a persistent shift over the last 2 decades, where now energy is actually the thing that continues to bind relationships together even throughout conflict. We go back 5 or 6 years to the blockade of Qatar by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. During that conflict, which got very, very hot at some periods of time, thank God no actual artillery was exchanged, but it was very tense for a very long time. But during that period of time, there was never a cessation of energy resources that stopped flowing from Qatar to the United Arab Emirates, even though they were in conflict with one another. So here we have an example of how energy actually continued to provide connective tissue rather than a flashpoint for conflict. I think when it comes to talking about the way that the world sees energy and how geopolitics is driving those energy choices that we all have, I think it's important to look at the European example, as you in recent history, as you've just pointed out, and the impact that the war in Ukraine, Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, for a second time, by the way, in the last 10 years, has influenced the decisions in Europe and what we can all learn from the decisions that were made previous to that conflict and after. And I'll be brief about that, but I think we see, and our European partners have realized it in a very painful way, that placing too much of your energy resources or your energy diversification in one energy resource creates a significant vulnerability. And over-reliance on Russian resources, on one single type of resource from one single supplier, created a really significant strategic vulnerability. And so when we talk about how that is going to and is affecting the choices that we are all making, that governments are making, when it comes to the energy mix. And to be clear, it is a mix. It's no single source of energy, right? At the heart of that lies the concern for energy security, energy affordability, and the ability for energy to be sustainable. That's what we often talk about as the energy trilemma. And so when we're looking at striking a balance between those three things, and no one part of that triangle can be prioritized over the other. The math doesn't work. The geometry doesn't work there. And it's true when it comes to the policy. Diversification of resources, diversification of suppliers, diversification of routes really lies at the heart of energy security, which is driving a lot of the geopolitical considerations that we've seen, and the war between Russia and Ukraine and the impact that has had globally, because it is a global energy system. And so, the vast majority of the world's fertilizer inputs come out of Ukraine and Russia. So farmers here in Brazil felt very much the impact of that conflict, even though there were not tremendous amount of resources here in Brazil imported from Russia or Ukraine when it comes to pure hydrocarbons. So you can't extract anything from anything else, and it's definitely driving a new decision-making model that's based on energy security, energy access, and diversification.
Thank you. Vitella, I was listening to Joshua, and one thing that strikes me is when Europe has turned from the Russian gas and to renewables, another player has emerged as a big strategic player in the energy of the world. This is China, and the electrification that Europe and part of United States has done does increase the role of China in the energy sector, as changing the role from an importer of oil and gas, mostly importer of oil and gas, to a supplier of minerals, supplier of critical strategic inputs to the new energy environment. So how do you see the China role in this new geopolitical arrangement for energy supply?
Oh, that's a great question. First of all, thank you, Marcio and Joshua. We had a panel yesterday. It was very nice. It was a pleasure. Thank you for everybody for coming. So this is actually the point, because China is supporting Russia in this war. We know that China is buying the oil from Russia more than ever right now. Not just China, but also India. Also, Brazil is the second biggest importer from the diesel from Russia right now. In 2022, in comparison with 2023, the imports of diesel from Russia increased by 6,000% in this country, Joshua. And in the last year, by 9,000%. So there is a big deal here, because if eventually the US impose the secondary tariffs, there is a risk that Brazil will get 500% tariffs because of that. It's a worry for this country. Also, the fertilizers. It's true that we need the fertilizers from Russia, but it's also true that Azerbaijan tried to sell the fertilizers to Brazil several times. Brazil didn't buy that. We import 80% of the fertilizers of this country, agricultural country, needs to produce. It's also strategic. We should produce more in this country. So the point right now is that when Trump got the office in the second mandate, he said, we will put the oil price down. It will be in benefit of Ukraine, to be in benefit of the end of this war. But this is not happening. Actually, it's quite the opposite. Since 2 years ago, when we had the conflict between Israel and Iran, the oil price went up and up 14% in the first days. And now they are going down again, because there is no more risk, at least for now, of Strait of Hormuz blockade. But the point is, and I will go back to your question, to think about the oil duct from Iran to China, you see that there is no risk for China. China will continue to buy oil from Iran. Iran in 2023 produced 3.9% of all oil exportations in the world. Iran is under sanctions. Iran is the second most sanctioned country in the world, has more than 5,000 sanctions. The first one is Russia, with more than 24,000 sanctions because of the invasion of Ukraine. But the point is, China doesn't follow the sanctions. China just buys 95% of Iranian production of oil. The other 5%, we have several countries buying. Syria was one of them till the last year before Bashar al-Assad was put down. So China also has a big oil duct connecting Pakistan to his territory and crossing Kashmir. You see, there is another big deal because a few weeks ago we had a problem between India and Pakistan because of that. So the energy, and I agree with Joshua about that, energy is in the center of this mess. And we still have other problems here. We still have the nuclear problems because of Zaporizhia and Ukraine, because of the Iranian facilities, Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordo that were bombed a few days ago. And we still have problems like Germany not wanting to produce nuclear energy anymore because of the Fukushima thing. Right now, France is using 70% of his structure coming from nuclear plants, but this kind of thing, these problems with nuclear plants that we are having right now, this is a big, big deal for the future. And on the other hand of this, we still have the Paris Agreement, because during Biden administration, the U.S. were back to Paris Agreement, but Trump left the agreement in the first mandate and just left again. So, and this is my question to Joshua, if I can. So what is the American plan for that?
I'm gonna add some to the question of Vitello because we think there is a change in the supply of energy in the world. So this is how we are accommodating these new pressures. Geopolitics has a role in that. And one of the questions that we discuss in Brazil and mostly FGV is that Brazil has been passed through a lot of economic crisis in the last 40 years because we didn't have enough oil to be self-sustained. And Brazil has the opportunity to be the fifth greater exporter of oil in the next few years. So this for Brazil is a huge change of geopolitical position, and we think that we always look from the place we are to the place we want to be, and the discussion has made a somewhat a shift from the last few years, because now oil and gas has turned back to be an important part of this transition. Now we see a transition as a transition because all the technological routes are going to go side by side to supply security, energy security in the world. And how do you see the comebacking of oil and gas as energy source, of the role of oil and gas with all the pressure, all the climate pressures, and how do you think we're going to evolve with this new source of energy, the renewables, alongside with the oldest source of energy, oil and gas?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to talk about the difference between energy scarcity and energy abundance. And what we're espousing as the central tenet of this administration's energy policy is a policy of energy abundance. And it's a policy that is inclusive of all forms of energy. And I think when we make choices that are based upon vectors that are not economically viable, are not additive to the energy mix, but rather subtract from the overall energy mix, and are not focused on economic growth and the bettering of human lives and the raising up of the standard of living of our constituents, we find ourselves in a very upside down and an unsustainable energy policy position. And so I think that we have to focus on the opportunities to add energy to our system. And right now we have an energy pie in the world that is larger than it's ever been. There are more resources available now in the world than ever has been, but demand is growing, and demand threatens to outstrip the amount of energy resources if we're not creative about how we continue to explore and develop for those resources and how we continue to deploy those resources. How do we increase the efficiency of data centers? How do we reduce the amount of heat that is created that's going to power the artificial intelligence revolution? And I would actually argue it's not a revolution, it's an evolution. There's no going back. It will change the way that we do everything forever. And yesterday, Vitaly and I talked a little bit about the difference between energy for AI and AI for energy. And it's a intertwined relationship between the two. We have to be able to power AI data centers, but we also have to be able to use that AI to create smarter, more productive, and more efficient energy systems so that the inputs that we put into those systems give us greater outputs than we currently have. I would also argue that oil and gas never went away. It has never stopped being the world's number one source of energy within the last 50 years. The energy mix will continue to change. And what I really liked about what you said is the movement side by side. I like to use the phrase parallel movement. As we continue to explore and develop our hydrocarbon resources, we continue to develop new sources of energy and increase the energy density of those energy resources. And we have to do both. But one cannot come at the expense of the other. It cannot be a sequential movement. It cannot be that we stop using something today and start using something the next day. That's not how it works. In the history of the world's energy story, there's only one energy resource that is not continuing to be used today to significant degrees in various different jurisdictions. Only one. We still use biomass. We still burn wood and trees. We still use coal. We still use heavy fuel oil. We'll still use oil and gas. Nuclear. The only one we don't use anymore is whale oil. So what that speaks to is the fact that this is an additive energy story. So the idea that we're going to be walking away from anything in totality isn't reality. And I think if we're going to make better choices, more effective and more impactful choices, we have to be focused on reality. And so at the Department of Energy, one of our crown jewels is the National Laboratory System. We have 17 national laboratories with people that are far, far more intelligent than I am. And it's a real privilege to get to spend time around our scientists and our engineers who are working on these problems of tomorrow and trying to improve the solutions of today. That work is incredibly important. But you can't take the work that's in those laboratories now and replace that with the energy resources and the power generation technology and capacity that we have today. It's just simply not ready for prime time. Batteries are an incredibly important part of balancing our energy systems. But battery density and battery chemistry is still very much in the process of evolution. And so once it gets there, and until it gets there, where those resources that are currently intermittent, like solar, like wind, can be stored effectively to provide baseload, powerful, effective baseload to drive industrialization, to grow economies, that's always going to remain only a part of our energy systems. So I think it's being clear-eyed about what is reality, where is the technology readiness level of those various options. How do we continue to improve that? And how do we continue to improve the resources that we use today? There's nothing that says that we have to continue to have the carbon footprint that we currently do when we burn natural gas. And U.S. technology and U.S. companies are working very, very hard with a lot of international partners and a lot of engineering partnerships to bring down the carbon intensity of those hydrocarbon resources. So it's a yes and conversation. I think it's not rather than a yes or conversation.
Thank you, Joshua. Vitello, I would like to ask you in the sense of Joshua said, as we see the first time that the energy sector has deal with a great technological advance at this point. in the last years, energy was seen as a mature technology, dominated technology. Incremental advances were seen in the offshore exploration, but now there is some features of technological advances and technological race between several countries, and how does the geopolitics of nearshoring, powershoring can affect this alliance that Joshua says, and how they will affect the geopolitics of energy in the next few years? How do you see that?
In academia, we treat this problem as a global public good. So it's a global public good that the world will not be much, much warmer till the end of this century. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that because there was an agreement by 2015 in Paris. Also, the reports of my colleagues of this field are that we have 3 years to avoid 1.5 degrees of increasing of temperatures by the end of the century. So the big deal here, and I see Joshua is a member of American government, and I promised him I would not ask difficult questions, but this is the point. Every time we have a change of government, we have a different strategy. So Trump left the Paris Agreement in the first mandate. Biden, in the first day in office, came back to the Paris Agreement. And right now, the US is out again. And the US is by far the biggest consumer of energy in the world. So I see a country like Brazil. Brazil has a lot of renewable energy. We have very, very renewable source. We had this conversation yesterday. But Brazil can't do everything alone. Also, can't Europe. We need the US. And I agree with Joshua when he says that we will not just leave a source of energy to go to another. But it's hard to understand how the previous government had subsidies to electric cars. And by now, there is not anymore, despite of Elon Musk being part of the government during the first months. So, again, it's a hard conversation because the world needs the US. It's a global public good. The planet's not getting warmer is in benefit of everybody in the planet. So, of course, I understand there are costs to change the sources of energy and the way we use the energy in all the world. But again, we need the US at this moment. And again, Joshua, what is the American strategy, not the government strategy?
I think Joshua is happy that I'm making the questions, right, Joshua? Let me try to go along with Vitello here. How do I rephrase that? I think the renewables and the climate problems has a question of scale. To be a viable route of energy, we have to get enough scale so the price of energy the price of renewable energy can be competitive to other sources like oil and other sources that are now the mainstream of energy sources in the world. So we know that U.S. has a big role in giving scale to the new technologies. We know that China has a role as giving scale, and Europe has a role of giving scale. In the sense of Vitaly is asking how the U.S. can be a part of this ramp up for the renewables and ramp up of the transition. But keeping energy security, and how can U.S. can play along in this how to call a game of scale in the renewable energy sector.
So renewable energy is certainly an incredibly important part of the energy mix. And in the United States, there are not two states that have the same energy mix because each state has different infrastructure. Each state has different needs in terms of population and industrialization. And I think that's something that we have in common, certainly here in Brazil, but many jurisdictions throughout the world. And so an energy mix is by definition going to be bespoke to meet the needs of the constituency that it's intended to serve. Renewable energy has a number of headwinds, scale being one of them. But getting back to what I was talking about earlier in terms of technology, readiness levels, and energy density, the battery technology is just simply not there to provide the energy density, to take away the intermittency, and to provide the stable baseload that is simply essential. Can't do without it. And when you do without it, you have what happens in the Iberian Peninsula. You have what happens in other jurisdictions, like what happened in Texas, because of the isolation and the over-reliance on a single source of energy. And so it's about blending those options into a mix that is both sustainable and commercially viable. There's a large European partner who has been at the forefront of the reduction in carbon footprint and the pushing of renewable energy as the resource and the generation source of choice for the future. And that country simultaneously is now using more coal by a factor of 3 than they were 6 years previous because of their over-reliance on a single resource of natural gas coming from Russia. So you can have, and simultaneously, that country has also experienced significant industrial contraction. So if you want to create jobs and you want to grow an economy and you want to be able to provide for energy security and stability, then you have to have a balanced energy system, one that fits that jurisdiction, but one that's also sustainable, not just from a climate change perspective, but from an economic perspective. Because when people don't have jobs, they tend to be unhappy. And people are unhappy, they go to the ballot box and they vote. And that's one of the challenges that I think that we see is extreme positions lead to extreme outcomes when it comes to politics. And I have to defer to Vitaly on that process because it's certainly more his bailiwick than mine. But I think those choices need to be balanced. And the United States is in a position to not only assist, but lead globally, as we are the largest of consumers of energy, but also the largest producers of energy. We produce more oil and more natural gas than any country in the world. And with that comes a lot of responsibility, but also a lot of opportunity. And you see U.S. industry innovating to do things in a more efficient, in a more impactful, and in a more cost-effective way. It was technology that drove the shale revolution that exploded American energy potential globally. And that technology has been diffused throughout the world and has unlocked a lot of the energy resource opportunities for partners and allies that would never have been there without U.S. technology, U.S. research and development funded by the Department of Energy. So we're very proud of the role that we play in supporting the public or the private sector in their research efforts to make energy more abundant, more affordable, and more efficient. So it's a balancing act. And as time continues to move right along the x-axis, that energy mix will change. Those technology readiness levels will increase, and we'll see new options that currently are not widely available, like small modular reactor technology, which we here in the United States and the Department of Energy think is going to absolutely change the world. But it's not ready yet. We're working on it. And hopefully in the near future, we will see a very different set of choices where it does not become one where you have to choose either efficiency and a lower carbon footprint or economic growth and industrialization of economies.
Perfect. Vitello, let me go back to the remarks that you made about the climate importance at this point. So we're talking about technological dispute between United States and China, especially between United States and China, to lead that transformation to renewable in the next few years. And we think in both sides there is some contradiction. China has a lot of energy sources that claim to be old and polluted sources, but they both countries are trying to lead this change at this point with technological investments to new initiatives on the renewables and new sources of energy. How do you see that race? How do you see the geopolitics of that technological race to be a leader in a new environment of a new environment of energy sources regarding the climate?
Well, the energy transition is a secondary point here. It's clear. U.S. and China was competing to lead the world. Point. The second thing is energy, because China is trying to be the biggest economy, trying to build a huge army to 2034, so almost 10 years ahead. And the U.S. is trying to keep the power around the world. Right now, we have a transition because the new administration, the Trump administration, is living a strategy that the U.S. had for Europe for 80 years. It was the U.S. who defend European countries in case of war. It's NATO Article 5. Yesterday, for the first time, Trump said, for the first time in his life, not in this administration, he said clearly he would defend Europe. But just because Europe is about to spend 5% of GDP in defense till 2035, and besides, maybe Spain will not be in this plan because Spain is not voluntary to spend so much. So after doubling the tariffs against Spain, maybe the US will not defend Spain. But anyway, we are watching a race of armament. We have seen that before. We have seen that before the First World War, before the Second World War. We are seeing this again. Europe will spend 800 billion euros in defense in the next years. And Europe is rearming because they are afraid of Russia. And they are afraid of Russia because they don't think Russia will stop in Ukraine. And Trump now is saying that clearly. Yesterday, they said that. He said, maybe Putin will not stop. Of course, energy is not on the map right now. Energy is necessary to produce weapons. Energy is necessary for the economies keeping growing up. But energy is not the focus. The focus is hegemony. Who will be the leader? And this is again the point. When China buys a lot of oil from Russia, despite China being, according to Xi Jinping, against this war, when India does the same, despite Narendra Modi's declared that he's against the war, when Brazil buys diesel from Russia, despite our president says, okay, we are pro-peace. We are just funding a war. That's it. And the war is more important now. The security problems are more important now than the future of the planet. It's also clear. Because if we are not 100% crystal clear about our choices for the future of the planet, for the transition, because the countries are still rich. I'm not criticizing because Brazil still has a lot of oil, Joshua. I told you yesterday our biggest company is Petrobras. It's the biggest company of the country. It's an oil company. And we are debating how you extract oil close to Amazon. It's a huge debate inside the government. But the point is energy. And sorry to say that in an event about energy is secondary in comparison with geopolitical problems. And a few days ago, a lot of people were asking questions about the Third World War. And I used to say, okay, we are not that close. We need to see what happened in the Second World War. We had a Nazi Germany projecting power over Europe, and in 1941 projecting power over Soviet Union that was an ally of Nazi Germany till that point. We had a Japan projecting power over China, and a fascist Italy from Mussolini projected power on Mediterranean Sea and Ethiopia. Right now, we have X, a form X. It's China, Russia, North Korea, Venezuela, and Iran. But clearly, Russia or China were not up to defend Iran during this war. So we are not that close to the Third World War, but we are clearly living a second Cold War.
No, thank you. Just to finish, Joshua, I'd like to talk about a little bit of what Vitello said. Although Vitello said that the energy is a secondary choice in this process of war, we know from Second World War that energy had played a big role in most of the battles, especially in Africa. We have a very documented history on how the lack of access to gasoline and made the army of Germany lost most of the battles there. But how in this moment energy plays a role in this process of geopolitical battles and geopolitical advance from different countries, and how do you think we will evolve? And I'll give the same question to you, Vitello. How we think that
we have 1 minute.
Yeah, how do you think this will evolve?
Well, look, I having been in several complat deployments myself, I can tell you that all war is about logistics and getting things from point A to point B. It's sort of, I feel like it's a chicken and egg situation in terms of what the professor was saying. Is energy driving geopolitics, or is geopolitics driving energy? You can't project power without a military. You can't have a military without energy resources and access to critical minerals. We see the Chinese, weaponizing their access and their dominance in the critical mineral space to exert their geopolitical power. So I would argue that there's multiple instruments that are used to exert power and to control different spaces of the geopolitical board. I think energy is, again, something that is able to either create that connective tissue between countries and between economies, or it's something that can create strategic vulnerabilities. And when we look at our partners and allies, one of the things that we're not here to do is tell our partners and allies what their energy choices should be and what their energy mix has to be. It's not right of us to tell developing economies that they can't access energy resources that can lift their populations out of poverty and into economic abundance simply because it was happening too late in the calendar. There's no justice in that. So what we're here to do is partner with our partners and allies throughout the world and help them make the best choices that they can and get the maximum value for the resources that they have, so they can make better choices, so they can have partnerships that are of mutual benefit and not simply one-sided, which is the case in the value proposition for some of the alternatives to partnership with the United States. So it's about giving people choices. It's about bettering human lives. It's about growing the energy pie. And it's about doing so in a way that's smart and based on clear-eyed analysis of what really is, not what we want to be.
Thank you. Vitello, last remarks.
I do that in 30 seconds. It's clear. We have an answer for this dilemma. The answer is, if you have power, you can use your energy. If you don't have power, you will not use your energy. Look at Venezuela. Venezuela has a huge amount of oil, and Venezuela is broke. So It's about geopolitics. And of course, geopolitics needs energy to grow up.
Thank you both. Nice to meet you. Thank you, everybody.
Obrigado.